So I'll start over and say welcome to the second hour of Mind Shifters Radio. Today is Tuesday, July the 8th, 2025. And we're glad you're with us. And Susan had sent an email that they were doing something with their Spanish family. And
they're accompanying, I think, one of the immigrants that they work with to their immigration hearing in Philadelphia. So if everybody would hold a space for them with all that's going on in the immigration world, they're going to accompany this person. I'm not sure where they're from, but Tim, Susan's husband's an attorney, so they're going to support. And welcome, Donald. We haven't seen you in a while. Glad you're back. Hope your journey went well. And I'm not sure whether Celinda is going to join us or not. I had sent her a text, and I haven't heard back from her. Let me just do a quick look here. No, she's not going to join us today. Okay. Well, I had planned to go into the lesson on the development of trust. Maybe we'll go ahead and do that anyway. Look at that sweet face. Lincoln Elias. You're muted, sweetie.
He hears your voice. You see Papa?
What's going on here? What's going on here? Anyway. So we're glad you're here, and I think I'll go ahead with that lesson, unless someone has something else to bring up, something else to focus on, questions, thoughts, support needed. What's exciting in your world? Push the mute button and unmute yourself. Say hello. Go for it, Donald.
Can you hear me yet?
You're loud and clear.
Okay. Ow, I can never remember if I have to push two buttons to talk. One to
You got that whole speaker thing worked out?
No, I cannot. If someone has an iPhone and they know how to use an external Bluetooth speaker with Zoom, please let me know, because I've researched it online and done what they said, and I can't I can't do it for some reason. It may not be not be able to do it. So I'm on speakerphone right now with the.
Yeah. Oh, you sound good. You sound good and clear and crisp voice, so that's great. How did your visit go and your travel with your dad?
It was good. He really enjoyed it. He was really appreciative of me initiating it and going with, because he knows he couldn't go on his own, and everybody was glad to see him. And
nice.
He was amazed at and thankful to me for going back to his boyhood home at 90 years old, because he knows it's going to be the last time he's there and sees his relatives. Not necessarily because his health is failing per se, but it's hard. He likes his routine, and to do something like that and get on a plane, which he probably hasn't done in over a dozen years, and
that's a big deal.
Yeah,
bless his heart.
But it was nice. He found a VRBO right in the small town that he grew up in, and it was with walking distance of like the small downtown area. Was not. I mean, what an idyllic place to grow up. I mean, especially compared. I mean, I could see moving there. It's such a nice small town. Now I know that he had dysfunction within the family, so nothing was completely rosy. But in terms of the external environment, especially and I know I shouldn't be comparing, but compared to where I grew up, I mean, wow, it was just an incredible place. Cool. And I actually went up to the house where he basically grew up in from second grade till he dropped out of high school to go into the Marines, which there was no reason to, other than my personal feeling is he wanted to get out of the house. I think that's pretty typical of a lot of boys.
Very common.
When they get to a certain age, especially if they don't have a loving relationship with their father, which I don't think that he did, probably based on
Right.
things I know and my own experiences and the passing down of generational dysfunction. Anyway, so from second grade to he was about 18, he grew up in this house, and I remember going there as a really small kid, like maybe 3 or 4, because I know my grandfather bought another house in 1966, which I remember going to, but I remember specifically going to this house where he grew up, and he grew up in this attic. There's a lot of duplexes in Pennsylvania, in eastern Pennsylvania, and so this is a duplex where they have 2 units right next to one another, and they're like 3-story walk-ups. And he grew up in the attic all the way up, which must have been brutal with this kind of heat, because there was no air conditioning then. Anyway, I knocked on the door just by chance and met a really nice couple and told them the story, like, hey, my dad's 90 and we're here for a family reunion, and he grew up in this house, and I know, would it be okay if he came in and looked around? And he was really into it, wanted to know the history of the house. They had bought it just 2 years ago, and so that's not
Everybody
something.
was touched.
Yeah, that's not something he would have asked me to do, and I wasn't even sure that he would go, because it always depends on kind of his mood at the time about things. But yeah, he was really into it, and we spent about 45 minutes over there, and he was telling him how the house originally was and stuff like that. It was cool. So
nice.
So this is a brief, just off the topic question I wanted to get your answer to. So today I spent my hour walking listening to a debate from 2007 between Christopher Hitchens and Chris Hedges, who that I really like Chris Hedges a lot. And I used to like Christopher Hitchens too. I remember listening to him in the 90s. I mean, obviously brilliant guy, very erudite, well-spoken. But he flipped after 2001 and sort of sided with now he's most known for being an atheist, which I could never be. I mean, that's what he talks about a lot. And that's actually the subject of this debate to a certain extent. Was about religion. And it was shocking that he became a proponent of the Iraq War, and he was a proponent of the war in the Balkans, when all his time before that, he was a pretty well-known, leftist liberal. So this was 2007, well after the tragedies of the Iraq War, and it was in Berkeley, a debate, like I said, between Chris Hedges and him. So pretty high level in my estimation with those two guys.
Right.
But one thing Chris Hedges said that kind of struck with me, because it kind of relates to something you said. I wanted to see what you thought about this. So I think you often say that love should not be considered a verb, but it should be a noun. Is that right?
Yeah, the love is a noun. It's not a verb.
Right. Love is a noun.
And people use it as a verb.
Right. So
and that's like just about every other loss of meaning from the Aramaic has been turned backward with that action.
Right. So one thing Chris said in one of his sort of rebuttals to Christopher Hitchens was that he thought, which I thought was interesting, that he thought God should be considered a verb and not a noun.
Right.
Which is, there's a lot of different ways you can think about that, but that sort of resonated with me, and I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Well, there's only, when you think about life, and there are many different words. I love what, what's his name? Wartime England. His name's not coming to mind, but anyway, his statement was, we have the privilege of being separated by a common language.
Winston
Churchill, yeah. And if we look at, my take is, if we look at the concept behind what a word represents, because of course, and as the Course in Miracles very aptly points out, a word is a symbol. It's something made up with the mind to represent something. And so whatever anyone has in brain cells is going to tend to be what that word becomes for them. That'll be the meaning they'll attach to it. And separated by a common language, my take is if you look at, what's behind the theologian, they say, well, there's this all-powerful, ever-expanding, all-knowing being that's behind the creation. It occupies all space and takes all action. There's a whole list of things. If we look at, the psychiatrist idea of the unconscious, we find a similar description. If we listen to the physicist description of energy, we find, a similar concept. There's this something in which we live, move, and have our being, and I think another word for it is love. It is the presence in which we move. And so how one's mind holds each of those words, I think, is one of the reasons why we have so much conflict in the world. Is because if I have a different set of brain cells for a word than you do, then my meaning's different from you. And, where's our communication going to come from if the words I hold are the opposite or different from the way you hold words? So if we think of the creator as the only action, the only mover that can take action, the fact is we don't know how to do anything. I ask the expert physiologist, how do you raise your arm? And the expert physiologist raises his arm, and I said, no, I didn't ask if you could do it. I asked how you did it. And the truth is the best physiologist in the world couldn't tell me because we don't know. But we do set an image, we do set a goal, and something responds in us. And so my take is underlying all of that, if we're talking about that something that responds to us, that something that responds to us is the only actor, so it would be a noun. And in action, I think we'd have to create a different word for that action. And if you look back in the original creation story, the word that's used for that which is the creator going into action, the best translation of that word I've come up with is brooded. The Greeks translates the Spirit of God moved across the face of the waters, but in Aramaic, the original term, as I understand it, is it brooded. And if you think of yourself brooding, if you think of, what you focus on, what you center on becomes your physiology, becomes your emotions, becomes your creative process. And so what we tend to brood over, we tend to create. Or I should more correctly probably say, we tend to give the instruction to that power in which we live, move, and have our being to carry out that creative act. But my take would be the fact of being the creator would be a noun, and the action taken by the creator would be the verb. Is that getting anywhere close to what you're searching for, what you're looking at?
Possibly. I mean, but you're convinced more that it's a noun. I almost see it as like, well, one of these ineffable things. And I can kind of see, I mean, he didn't go into it in more detail, but I can kind of see what I think Chris Hedges was trying to say, in that, like, God is sort of the sea that we're all part of or in,
Right.
or extension of. So in that sense, it seems not like a noun that you can put a finger on, whereas it's the entire enormity of every thought, existence, being, that sort of thing. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, and again, words are symbols. We'd have to agree on a definition before we could move forward with words. And that's one of the reasons why they're so inadequate at describing actuality. And in fact, we had a question come up yesterday on trust. That was kind of how we ended yesterday's show. And I had recommended to Celinda, who's not here today, that she check out the lesson on the development of trust in the course. And so many people, to me, this is kind of an example of what you're talking about. There's so many people who think that trust is something that when they know enough, they have enough, or whatever, something that comes from their minds when they have that, then they are able to trust. And my take is it's just the opposite of that. If we rely on our minds and what we think is knowledge in our minds, which, I still think that on the level where we're in a culture with so much hostility and fear, we're still like an ant looking at a mountain. When we look at the perceptual constructs of our minds, the realities we hold compared to what is actuality, I think we're kind of still primitive and childlike. And that trust doesn't come from knowledge or the mind or anything to do with the mind of man. Trust comes from living from a state of being, living as that being that we are. And that the development of that is really the development or the transfer out of the mind and its non-being self or its false images of self into living in the awareness of a created human being called love. And that to me is where the trust comes from. And that's what that whole lesson's about, which, is where we're going to head.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. One other quick thing I always wondered about. So I am no Bible scholar like you are. I wasn't from a super religious family, went to Sunday school, went to teacher training, and then basically stopped going. And I've had a lot of problems with institutionalized religion over the years, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse. But so the Old Testament, so we know that the New Testament, Yeshua spoke in Aramaic, but these people that lived during the time of the Old Testament, what was their original language? And what I know there must be, my grandfather, my dad's father, I remember hearing that he had read the Bible, from cover to cover a couple times. I'm not sure what good that did him necessarily, because he didn't sort of, glean the sort of the insights and knowledge that you talk about. Clearly, it seems from what I know about that family. But there must be some good things in the Old Testament. I know you talked about the story of Job. That's pretty interesting to me. It seems pretty clear you can't take much in the Old Testament literally. But even though there's some good things in there, I'm sure, which you know way more than I do, I know there's some horrible things in the Old Testament, especially in
Pretty insane.
Leviticus and stuff. And so I wondered about what language that was in and what you think about the Old Testament in general. I mean, I know we're more focused on Yeshua and the New Testament, and what his relationship was to the Old Testament. I mean, to me, there's so many. There's the Old Testament is so full of a vengeful, jealous and ego-driven God that it's almost like if there is such a thing as God as a person, which I don't think is right, but that whatever that entity, power, energy is, that it itself evolved from the time of the Old Testament to the New Testament. And then the last thing is, I never heard you talk much about the idea of Yeshua being a savior. and having died for our sins, which is sort of a core of Christianity, which never made any sense to me long before I discovered your work. It's like, well, if God really wanted to forgive us for our sins, I don't think he would need to give his so-called only begotten son, which didn't make sense. I don't even know what begotten means. I've never heard it in any other context. Plus, I thought we were all supposed to be God's children. So how is Yeshua God's only begotten son? So there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, my offering would be, first of all, my best understanding is that throughout the Old and the New Testament, the language thread is Aramaic. And that the Hebrew language is a daughter language of the Aramaic. And Yeshua was brought up speaking Aramaic, and that was, the temple language was Hebrew, as I understand it. And the lingua franca, like in the world today, the lingua franca is English. Just about everywhere you go, especially if you're in the business world, you'll find somebody that speaks English. So that's the common language. Now, you could go from the Middle East to the Great Wall of China for a period of thousands of years, and virtually everybody that you ran into spoke Aramaic. That was the language of the day. And as opposed to God evolving as such, my take would be, what I see the Old coming up into the New Testament, I see as we're evolving our ability to comprehend something about what is called the Creator. And it's our understanding that's evolving. And, in many cases, you hear about the horrors and, well, somebody told this group of people that God told them that they should go and kill every man, woman, child, and an animal in that other village and take all their stuff. And it's like, it's just, come on, who could believe that? And what we see is men in control of other men and directing it using the manipulations of their own minds. And of course, if you can convince somebody that you're God's representative, then you get to gain a whole lot more than you perhaps otherwise would. But when you come forward, you hear, this idea of God really truly coming out of the dark ages of this vengeful, I'm going to get you. I built a hellfire for eternity for you, into Yeshua's correction. And his correction is, one, there's no exclusive here. He didn't, when they asked him what it was like or how you prayed, he did not speak of the relationship with the Creator as something that was exclusive to him. And the Greeks did translate this word properly. It was our Father, that, we have a common source. And what we hear Yeshua doing is correcting the insanity that comes out of the Old Testament developmental phases and projections of people's hate and fear and rage and vengeance. And we hear Yeshua correcting and bringing us to the point where this is our Father, and it is her good pleasure to take us into the community of love, to have us live there. And to me, that's the antidote to all of the projections of men with their vengeances and their hatreds and their greed and their violence. Yeshua brings a correction. And then the other thing he does, where he understands, as the Course in Miracles also speaks about, says, the truth can't be spoken in words. You can't do it because a word is just a symbol. And actually, if I open my eyes and I bring energy in, let's say you're standing in front of me, you are an energetic being. My eyes will receive certain frequencies and energies from you. and those energies entering my eyes will cause certain brain cells to fire in me, and then my mind will make out of you something solid and physical and real called a body, which you clearly are not. I mean, if X-rays can pass through you, if radio waves can pass through you, obviously you're not solid. So maybe I'm living in a fantasy of appearances. Yeshua said, be careful, don't judge by appearances, was to let those things go and escape from the mind that does all these things and step into the only place, relating it back to the lesson we're going to talk about in a few minutes, the development of trust. The only place that trust is going to come from is when I rest in that presence that is in me. And as opposed to trying to explain the Creator via words, what Yeshua did was he said, here's how you come to a direct experience of the Creator. And so his instruction sets in Aramaic give us not a theology, although many have turned it into a theology, but rather than a theology, it gives us a methodology. And when people think of it as a theology, then you come into this whole savior complex, and there's nothing you can do. You're just a hopeless, helpless sinner. That's much of the story of Christianity today. But then if you actually listen to Yeshua's words, he says, why are you not doing what I told you to do? Like I gave you a pathway. Why aren't you following it? Well, you can go back and find a passage where he gave that pathway to a wide audience of disciples, and somewhere in the range of half of them literally said, at least according to the Greek translations, in response to his instruction, said, too hard a saying, who can hear it? Now, what he offered them was, you've got to do your work. You're going to have to clean up the hostility, the fear, the rage, the guilt, the grief, the generational patterns of drama and trauma. You're going to have to forgive from your heart. You're going to have to remove it from your own unconscious. You're going to have to face it and deal with it. And they said, oh, too hard saying. Who can hear that? And they left and never came back. And my take is they made up a theology that is, well, see, there's this guy over here and he's going to save us. And here's our whole story about how we make that make sense. But that's not the story. That's not even close to what Yeshua said. Those who didn't want to do their work made up all kinds of things. You look at somebody, you ask them to be accountable for something, and oh my God, the stories they can make up to avoid accountability are pretty amazing. And they can distort and destroy all sorts of things. So my take is Yeshua brought a set of words. He knew how the mind operated, and he knew that in order to liberate the direct experience that lies within us of what life is and what life is about, there were certain mechanisms of the mind you had to understand in order to make that a possibility. And he gave those mechanisms and he gave those tools. And to a great deal. And if you look at that story where approximately half of the disciples who were there said, too hard a saying, who can hear it, and left. You can get, just by reading the context of that event, you can get a pretty good sense of how intense the energy must have been. I mean, he's talking to people who, you're going to have to face and deal with your rage, your hatred, your family, pain and trauma. You have to deal with those things. And the energy must have gotten pretty heavy, because as those 12, or pardon me, as the 12 remain, the rest of them left, Yeshua turns to Peter, the leader of the 12, and he says, are you going to leave too? I mean, I think it gives us a real sense of how intense the energy must have been with these guys who were like, I don't want to look inside of me. I don't want to deal with my pain, my trauma, my hate, my fear. I want to hang out with my story and blame my dad or my mom or my neighbor, and if I don't have enough money, I want to be able to go rob that other, that town over there, and I'll grab that passage where God said, go kill every man, woman, child, and animal. and then I'll be just, everything will be fine. So I'm not going to do this stuff you're telling me to do.
And that's the story of all of us, right? None of
The
us.
story. That's the story today. Yeah, it's like, and that's where I felt yesterday that Celinda's searching was powerful, and the lesson on the development of trust is quite powerful, and it really comes down to you got to lay down your mind. You just got to lay that thing down. That thing that's always told us, well, I'm going to figure this out. Just give me enough information, then I'll be able to figure it out. I'll be able to fix it all. It's like, no, you're going to have to drop that thing and step into a level of breathing, a level of connectedness, and a level of trust that you could never get from your mind. And the atheist thing that you're talking about, one of the best definition of an atheist I ever heard was that an atheist is somebody who prays to God there's no God. And again, you can turn somebody into an atheist just by giving enough of a hateful description of the creator that people go, well, who could believe in such a creature? I remember listening to one lecture that Dawkins did on well, who could ever believe that the creator, a loving creator, exists when, and he uses an example of children in Africa are blind because parasites have eaten away their eyes and they've lost their eyes and they're blind now. That was like one of the proofs he offered for it. There's no creator. And I wish I could had Dawkins' phone number to call him and say, excuse me, sir, why don't you stop wasting your time going around trying to convince everybody that the bull that you believe in is true? And why don't you take some of that time, intelligence, money, and energy and do something about those kids that are so malnourished that, yes, parasites are literally eating their eyes out of them. Why don't you do something about, rather than stand around and say, well, there's proof that God doesn't exist. It's like, and of course, again, we're back to words. Who has not had the experience of love? Some people may not remember it. Some people may push it away, but if you just substitute that word love for God, and that's one of the scriptural passages says, another word for God is love, another word is truth. Hold a newborn child and God exists. Now, there's the theological monstrosity that men have made up to blame for their inefficiencies or, whatever. Does that exist? No, that's all a fabrication of the mind. But do we live in this field called love? Is it factual? Is it real? Well, again, all you have to do is hold a newborn and And if we are not able to achieve that state, then Yeshua has a set of words that lay out a pathway. And for those who will give up, too hard a saying, who can hear it? And, if you don't have the eyes to see or the ears to hear, people can't even hear it. If they think that, that person out there really did enrage them and their rage has got nothing to do with them, it's all what that person did. And Yeshua would say, okay, so now you're going to have to own your rage. And you're going to have to realize that rage that's coursing through your veins right now and raised your blood pressure 70 points and has you just about ready to have a stroke, you're going to have to realize that's yours and it's about you. And I've got a tool for you with which you can remove that stress energy from your physiology and recover your health. Too hard a saying, who can hear it?
Yeah. Yeah, that all makes good sense. I'll let you get on to the trust thing, but I'll forward you this YouTube. It's an hour, well, a little less with interruptions between Christopher Hitchens and Chris Hedges.
Cool.
If you ever
Please do.
have time to listen to it, I think you'll find it interesting. Chris Hedges shares Hitchens' disdain for institutional religion, which I also agree with, but he denies Hitchens' point that nothing good can come out of religious perspective or religious sort of bent. Obviously, he's very much more entrenched in traditional religion, but not not to the crazy extent. I mean, his father was a Presbyterian minister. He has a master's in divinity from Harvard, but that's far from his only accomplishments.
Yeah.
Prolific
Yeah.
author, war correspondent, all these things.
Right.
And what's interesting is, especially at the end of this talk, Hedges is talking about the rise of Christian nationalism, the rise of oligarchs taking his book, which is called American Fascists, the Christian Right and the War on America. That was written in 2007. That was 18 years ago.
He was way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, he saw it because he was deep from in that area, and so he talks about oligarchs and this Christian nationalism and how it's destroying the country and that kind of thing. So anyway, yeah, I'll forward it to you.
Cool.
It's pretty interesting.
Cool, thank you. I'll look forward to watching it. And my offering, if I were in process with him directly, my offering to him would be, sir, how does disdain look like your life? And that I would tell him that he has no disdain whatsoever for, institutional religion. There's just this energy which is based in hostility called disdain in him. And if he were to apply forgiveness to that, then he could remove one of the shadows that his mind casts over truth and reach a new level. And for the person who says that there's no good that comes out of institutional religion, well, they haven't been watching very much. Have there been atrocities? Yes. But, one of the things I've noticed happens is where there is a lot of money, minds who are in the game of thievery gather. And so, it doesn't matter whether it's politics or church or, bank or whatever, thieves will gather. And that, is part and parcel of it. But that does not belie the genuine presence of human life that many in the religious field truly have and are truly working toward embodying and bringing it forward to the mass of people in the world. And, the simple fact that if you looked at today, compared to 100 years ago, the number of people starving to death in the world 100 years ago was the percentage compared to today was monumental. It is minuscule today. Too many still starving, but minuscule percentage-wise compared to 100 years ago. And that I would offer is mainly as a result of the actions of those involved in churches.
Right.
So is there a dark side to it? Oh, absolutely, wherever you find humans, but it's not the church, it's not the government, it's not the business, it's the people involved that bring the darkness or the light. And so,
Right. And I probably misspoke or mischaracterized Hedges' point in terms of his disdain for institutional. I mean, that's sort of Hitchens' point of view for sure, because he's a avowed atheist all the way to his death from, cancer. And he did lots of interviews with Dawkins, because they shared those beliefs. But you'll have to, by the way, there's nothing to watch. It's only audio. But
that's cool.
I think Hedges basically said the same thing, that it's not, and is one of his many counterpoints to Hitchens, is that it's not the religion per se, it's what people do with it. So that I wanted to clarify that, because I think that was more Hedges' point of view. So
yeah, cool, good. I'll appreciate seeing that link. You're giving a listen to it.
All right, great. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, have a blessed one. Welcome home.
Thanks.
Really sweet that you gave Dad that opportunity. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was nice. I'm glad we were able to do it. So I think it brought us closer to, and I think in general things have been better because, well, and I knew about this concept long before even discovering your work, but as I improve my field, let's say, or expand my field, that affects everyone around me, and that's going to affect how he reacts, to me too. I mean, he still has his moments, but in general, I think
Sure.
we get along much better now, because
Nice.
of the little bit of work I've done.
Right.
I'm still a long way, but yeah, it was good.
Cool. Well, it's sweet, and I get a little bit of a taste of your being able to do that with your dad. So some vicarious experience there for me. My dad would have been, oh geez, 115, so a quarter of a century ahead of your dad, and at 90. So I can sort of relish the thought of how cool it would have been to have taken him back to his hometown in Scotland. And one of the things I got to experience when I watched the movie The Streets of New York was another level of understanding of the world my dad grew up in.
Oh, wow.
Growing up in the streets of Glasgow, Scotland. They kind of, uh, so I hear you loud and clear, and really cool that you were able to do that with your dad. What a gift to give yourself. What a gift to give your dad. And you mentioned the impact of things. One of the quotes I came across, I don't remember the physicist's name at this moment, but yesterday a quote that I offered was one where this quantum physicist said, "You pick a flower here on Earth and you touch the farthest star."
Mm.
So each movement that each one of us makes toward the kind of expression you just had with your dad is impactful to the whole of the creation, to the whole of humanity and beyond. So thanks for doing that. It's cool.
You're welcome. Thanks for all you do.
All right. Have a blessed one.
Bye-bye.
Well, let's see. We're down to about 14 minutes. So anyone else want to hit your mute button and open up what's on your mind?
Do you have time to go through that lesson? If not, we did get an email with a question.
Let's do that. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We're getting a little close to time. I'd like to have a little more time, and it would be nice if Celinda could be here for it too. So that'd be perfect. Let's go with your question.
Okay, this is one of the gentlemen that is working on the converting the MP4 so we can put them up on YouTube,
Right.
some of the old
Awesome.
shows. And so this is Sean, and
Deep appreciation to Sean.
he says, I'm making my way through the Recovery Wednesdays. There is some good content in there. He's working with a small group chat of people who are tired of being bored at church and they're looking for more. A friend had posted, our thoughts generate feelings, our feelings generate our actions, and our actions become our future. I'd like to qualify things so that I will reply to his statement. As the Course in Miracles explains, we learn what we teach. So does the following reply sound okay, or what more could I add? So then this is
Could
his,
you give me the quote once again, sweetie?
well, that was what they had quoted. Our
Right,
thoughts
right.
generate feelings. Our feelings generate our actions, and our actions become our future. And what he
Yeah,
wanted,
I wouldn't agree with that one in a million years, but
okay, his reply back to them, and this is what he's wanting to know if this sounds right or what he could add to it. I find this true and valuable to see how we get ourselves in our own mess. In trying to qualify it, I think of this. When our content is cleaned up, we'll operate under the filter of love, which is non-feeling. So when negative thoughts arise, there is nothing there to resonate the other filters of hostility or fear. Intentions are what goals are formulated from. If the daughters of men do what they want, we have internal chaos. That's thoughts of the brain, another way to say it. We are to watch the sheep and keep them accounted for. Sheep are another metaphysical word for our thoughts. Emotions are the warning indicator of what our mind mode that we are operating in. That's the end of his quote.
okay. So with the original quote, my take would be that thoughts are the impetus that create emotions, but it isn't the emotions themselves that cause behavior. What my take would be that what causes behavior is the goal that one holds in their mind resonates a whole cadre of thoughts, and the thoughts that take precedent, the thoughts that come up with the strongest amplitude, will create emotional responses corresponding to the construct of the mind, corresponding to the structure in the mind, that mind's reality at that moment. And it's that structure of reality that determines or directs or inclines us towards certain behaviors. And then, depending how strong the emotion is attached to the thought disorders, then those emotions will tend to drive us into those particular behaviors structured out of those thoughts. And the importance of forgiveness is to go in and clean up the thought disorders so that the emotions that add impetus to a certain behavior that cause us to select this behavior over that one. It's like the one that lights up the most with the most emotional energy tends to be the action that most people take. The benefit of forgiveness is that if something really lights up emotionally and therefore tends to take over behavior, an example of that would be the drunk who says, well, I'm never going to do that again. I now understand what I did last night, and it was terrible, it was awful, it was evil, it was nasty, and I'm never going to do it again. And that drunk means that, but if they never go in and do the work of cleaning up the thought disorders that created that particular inclination toward behavior, then the next time the stress is up and the chips are down, or they use alcohol, which knocks the inhibitors out of their minds, and those inhibitors come forward as behavior prompts, then they'll do it again and again and again. So forgiveness is about weakening those things and removing the energetic trauma behind thought disorders that make a particular mind energy structure light up and become attractive to engage in. So that would be my take on those particular, or that particular quote. And honey, if you would you read once again the response? They're my thoughts on the quote itself, or what my response would be to someone based on that quote. But then if you could just reread
His response.
Yeah.
I find this true and valuable to see how we get ourselves in our own mess. Excuse me. In trying to qualify it, I think of this. When our content is cleaned up, we will operate under the filter of love, which is non-feeling. So when negative thoughts arise, there is nothing there to resonate the other filters of either hostility or fear. Intentions are what goals are formulated from. And I'm not sure where this other, but if the daughters of men do what they want, we have internal chaos.
That would be the mind of man taking over. Yeah, carbon-based memory. I get that.
That's thoughts of the brain, another way to say it.
Yep.
We are to watch the sheep and keep them accounted for. Sheep is another metaphysical word for thoughts. Emotions are the warning indicator of what mind mode we are operating in.
Yeah, that fits. That fits. There was one little twist in there. Could you read it once more?
Sure. I find this true and valuable to see how we get ourselves in our own mess. In trying to qualify it, I think of this. When our content is cleaned up, we'll operate under the filter of love, parenthesis, which is non-feeling, parenthesis.
Okay, so there's one place when love is when Rahma is the active filter in the mind, and love is present in physiology. I wouldn't call that a non-feeling space. To me, that is the most, the best descriptor I would know for it would come from Yeshua's words. And he speaks about the Greek translated as the peace, but it was actually in Aramaic, the serenity that surpasses all understanding. It is not of the mind. It's like now one is out of one's mind, and the experience, the physiological sensation of the presence of love and serenity is monumental and leaves no room for hostility or fear to move. And if it does, if one is practiced in holding to that space of serenity, then very quickly any emotional response that comes from hostility or fear is going to be transmuted very rapidly. If one maintains awareness of their breath and guards the portals of the mind. That's one piece the Greeks said have. They said, guard the portals of the mind. Be careful what you allow in there, and be aware of what's in there that wants to direct your behavior. And if it's not in harmony with your highest purpose, then you apply forgiveness to rid yourself of it.
So the rest of it was talking about it operating under the filter of love. So then when negative thoughts arise, if there's nothing there to resonate, the other filters of either hostility or fear. Intentions are what goals are formulated from. If the daughters of men do what they want, we have internal chaos. That's thoughts of the brain, another way to say it. We are to watch the sheep and keep them accounted for. Sheep are another metaphysical word for thoughts. Emotions are the warning indicator of what mind mode we are operating in.
Yeah, that sounds right on track to me. There are three basic modes. There's hostility, there's fear, and there's Rahma. And when they asked Yeshua what's most important in the law, like hands down, no question about it, Rahma comes first. Not loving God, loving neighbor, but having Rahma for the Creator, for neighbor. Because when that is so, then you have the gateway open for the state of being that we are, rather than the mind of man running us, the daughters of men, as you refer to it, but rather the presence of being, the presence of active love in physiology, in the emotions, in the mind, so that that's the governing energy. And from that will flow language that keeps the mind on track with that. And when I say on track, I mean keeps the mind acting as a servant of being, rather than having so much emotional turmoil or pain that raging unconscious mind takes over the alternative mind, what was called the mind of Christ, that raging mind takes it over, obliterates it, and sends us back into darkness. And of course, the objective of the work is just climbing up out of the hole of darkness, the generational patterns of rage and guilt and fear and hostility, to be freed of those. And when Brahma is active, there's a corresponding filter, Brahma being the filter over intentions, corresponding filter over perception. The two together, the secondary filter was called Kuba, and together those two filters were referred to as what they called perfect love. You remember they said perfect love. What they were saying is Brahma over intention, Kuba over perception. When sat, cast out fear. It's impossible for this device with that set of mind, that beatitude active. It can't. There's no. There are gating mechanisms that will create the elimination and the healing of everything based in hostility or fear when the primary mindset is out of Rahman and Kuba. You can't generate, even if you wanted to generate a hostility or fear based reality, you couldn't do it. So I'm with you on that one and hope that's helpful. And if there's another refinement to come, I'll look forward to another note. And or maybe you'll have the space to call in and have a conversation. In the meantime, certainly deeply appreciate all your help in getting those shows converted and put forward our next project is going to be taking all of these materials and training them on AI so that we'll be able to pull out every reference. Let's say, for instance, we talked about Rockland today. Once we've put in all 6,000 hours of radio shows, all of the articles, we just stepped our website up from 32 gigs to 40 gigs this week. By the way, if anybody wants to support us with a donation, that would be helpful to keep all the pieces flying together. But we've added so much that the person who does our hosting said they regretted it, but they had to boost the price because of the increase in data on our website. So anyway, much appreciation for what you're doing, Sean. Thank you. Everybody, have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings. Bye-bye.